Since the establishment of La Cosa Nostra in the United States in the late 19th century, a handful of mafia bosses have fought for power and control over the country throughout the years. Most of them met tragic ends, getting murdered or imprisoned for life, while some luckier ones were just imprisoned for some years, or maybe survived a murder attempt. But there are a select few mob bosses who were never jailed or killed, who lived to an old age to die of natural causes, who had a long and successful reign, and who were the most powerful and respected in the country. Welcome to Who's Number 1. In this video, we are going to take a look at the top 10 mafia bosses of all time. But before starting, let us know who you think is going to be number 1 in the comments section below, and make sure to stay until the end, for you are about to see names that you have never heard of before. Number 10, Al Capone. In a list like this, it is impossible not to include Al Capone. Al Capone is the most celebrated and infamous mobster in history, his story being told in dozens of fictionalized and true-to-life movies, television shows, books, and other media. An impressive collection for someone whose success, and indeed whose life were relatively brief. While people think he was in his 30s and 40s, reality is Capone was the youngest mobster ever to become the boss of a crime family, doing so in 1925 at age 26. For the general public, Al Capone epitomizes a mob boss, but in reality, he was actually the perfect example of how not to act if you want to be successful long-term in that life. Capone was the highest-earning mob boss ever, but his downfall catalyzer is exactly what marked his name in history and made him one of the biggest celebrities ever, his love for the spotlight. In 1931, after 6 years as boss of the Chicago outfit, Capone was convicted of tax evasion, and despite being released early due to his deteriorated health, he never regained his power, dying in 1947 at age 48, and leaving behind a legacy as the most celebrated mob boss ever. Number 9, Tommy Gagliano. Tommy Gagliano is one of the biggest enigmas ever in the American mob. In fact, there is hardly any information about him at all. Gagliano was the first boss of the now Lucchese crime family, and managed to serve only 15 months behind bars in more than 2 decades as a crime boss. If the primary ingredients for being a successful Cosa Nostra boss are keeping a low profile, avoiding arrests, shunning media publicity, and longevity, then you'd be hard-pressed to find someone with a more impressive tenure than Tommy Gagliano. He was probably the lowest-profile boss in the history of American Cosa Nostra. Gagliano usually issued his orders through his close allies, particularly Tommy Lucchese, who served as the family's public face and de facto street boss. The ultimate sign of just how mysterious Gagliano was, is that nobody is actually sure when he died. Some point to 1951 and others to 1953. Whichever it was, he was free, almost 70, and in control of his family. Number 8, Joe Profaci. Joe Profaci was a man of many talents, a business genius, a successful entrepreneur, a generous philanthropist, and above all, one of the most influential figures ever in organized crime. His crime family, now known as the Colombo family, was the last of the 5 New York families to be established, and he led it for 34 years. Profaci's most successful endeavors were in the world of business, as he developed several major companies that cornered a good portion of the market in various industries that are still active to this very day. Joe Profaci's business acumen is often overlooked, but no other top mafioso accomplished more in the upper world of business than him. From wholesale food suppliers, liquor distributorships, and linen supply companies to the restaurant industry, Profaci and company were like one-stop shopping. Despite having a few legal troubles, Joe Profaci never went to jail in his 34 years as a mob boss, and he died in control of his family in 1962, at the age of 65. Number 7, Carlos Marcello. Carlos Marcello made money for everyone, and that's why he moved into the leadership position of the New Orleans crime family in 1947 with few real challenges, a position he would keep until 1983. Marcello took control of Louisiana's illegal gambling network, and joined forces with Meyer Lansky in order to skim money from some of the most important casinos in the New Orleans area. He also expanded operations to other areas of the South, notably Dallas, which became effectively an offshoot of his New Orleans operation, and in cooperation with other mobsters, notably from the Chicago outfit and the 5 families of New York, to South Florida, as the Tampa and New Orleans Sicilian mafias had a long and close historical relationship. These connections would ultimately lead to conspiracy theories that put Marcello, along with Santo Trafficante Jr. and Sam Giancana, in league to assassinate President John F. Kennedy. Despite spending some years behind bars later in his life, Carlos Marcello died a free man in 1993, at 83 years old. Number 6. Stefano Magaddino. Stefano Magaddino is the longest-reigning mob boss in the history of the American Mafia, being boss of the Buffalo crime family from 1922 to 1974. His underworld influence stretched from Ohio to southern Ontario, and as far east as Montreal. Known as the Undertaker because he operated a legitimate funeral home business in Niagara Falls, Magaddino made his real money running a profitable bootlegging business during Prohibition by smuggling wine and spirits across the Niagara River into New York State. Stefano Magaddino led his Buffalo family through its glory years and its most powerful and profitable era. He was an old-style boss who preferred to stay in the background and not draw any attention to himself or his criminal activities if possible, which proved to do him good, as he never went to jail in more than 5 decades as a mafia boss. Due to his territory's remoteness and being geographically insulated from the inter-family squabbles of the New York City-based families, he was held in high regard, and was at times called upon to be an arbiter involving territorial disputes between crime families based there. Magaddino died in 1974 at age 82, after 52 years as a crime boss, not having spent a single day in jail. Number 5. Lucky Luciano. Lucky Luciano may not be the most successful mob boss ever, but he is by far the most important one. Luciano did more to create the modern American Mafia than any other single man, leading a group of young Italian and Jewish mobsters against the older set of so-called Mustache Petes. In the process, he set the stage for the mob to grow beyond the limits of bootlegging profits to become, in the words of his associate Meyer Lansky, bigger than United States Steel. Luciano brought down the 2 most powerful mob bosses in New York, created the commission where the 5 families would resolve conflicts, and as the head of the modern Genovese crime family, he became the most powerful mob boss in the country. However, everything he did would end up being what would bring him down, as being a very public leader for the mob, he inevitably drew attention from law enforcement, who eventually got enough evidence to convict him in 1936. However, during World War II, when the government needed the mob's help to keep New York's docks free of problems, Luciano helped them, and once the war ended, his sentence got commuted. He was deported back to Italy, where he died in 1962 at age 65. Number 4. Tommy Lucchese. Tommy Lucchese was one of the smartest mob bosses that ever existed, a well-connected and widely respected boss whose name today remains on the marquee of one of New York's 5 families. Smart, savvy, and fearless, Lucchese made his name with his muscle during Prohibition and kept power through the mid-20th century with cautious maneuvering, a strong head for business, and gangland political acumen. He became boss after Tommy Gagliano's death, and he was content with keeping a low profile, making money and accumulating considerable clout in the shadows, avoiding headlines in his more than 30 years as mob royalty. Lucchese became one of the most well-respected Cosa Nostra bosses of the post-war era, and he maintained close relationships with New York City politicians, including the mayors. Despite being arrested 6 times, he was only ever convicted in 1922, serving 13 months. He would die a free man in control of his family in 1967 at the age of 67, after 16 years as boss of the Lucchese crime family, though he had been the de facto street boss during most of Tommy Gagliano's tenure. Number 3. Santo Trafficante Jr. Santo Trafficante Jr. may just have the most appropriate name for a criminal ever. I mean, the guy's name literally means holy trafficker. Jokes aside, Trafficante was among the most powerful mafia bosses in the United States during his reign as the head of the Tampa crime family, which lasted from 1954 until his death in 1987. Trafficante controlled organized criminal operations in Florida and Cuba, which had previously been consolidated from several rival gangs by his father Santo Trafficante Sr. The Trafficante family formed a strong alliance with the Batista government in Cuba and profited from their investments, although they never achieved the goal of dominating gambling on the island, since they were forced to flee by the Cuban Revolution. Trafficante Jr. became tangled in a web of conspiracies to kill the leader of revolutionary Cuba and President John F. Kennedy. Though he was indicted several times throughout the 1950s, Trafficante was convicted only once in 1954, that conviction being overturned. He was arrested again in 1957 for attending the famous Appalachian Summit of mob leaders in New York, but those charges were dropped. All in all, Santo Trafficante Jr. never spent a day in prison, dying a free man in control of his family in 1987, at age 72. Number 2, Tony Accardo. In a criminal career that spanned 8 decades, Tony Accardo rose from being Al Capone's bodyguard to becoming the most important Chicago outfit boss ever, and for some, the most successful mafia boss of all time. Accardo got to positions of responsibility within the outfit after Capone's imprisonment in 1931, becoming the day-to-day boss in 1947, and ultimately the final outfit authority in 1972. He was smart enough to learn from his former boss Al Capone's mistakes, and stay out of the limelight. Despite an arrest record that began in 1923 and several initial convictions for various crimes, Tony Accardo spent only 1 day in jail, and that was because he was picked up for questioning on a holiday. Tony Accardo moved the Chicago outfit into new operations and territories, greatly increasing its power and wealth during his tenure as a boss. He helped the outfit make millions, while at the same time pushing the organization away from crimes that had previously gotten them into trouble. All in all, Tony Accardo managed to be the boss of one of the most important criminal organizations in the world for around 50 years, dying a free man in control of it at 86 years old, in 1992. Number 1, Carlo Gambino. If there was a real-life Vito Corleone, it was Carlo Gambino. Carlo Gambino was the most successful mob boss ever, earning a reputation as a shrewd and savvy businessman, and having significant interests in legitimate businesses, such as trucking, construction, and waste management. Being made at 19 in Sicily, he arrived in New York City in 1921, where he would become the boss of one of New York's 5 families in 1957. During his 19-year reign as a boss, Gambino's family was considered the strongest and most powerful out of the 5 New York families. He was so respected in that world that he was the unofficial chairman of the board of the Mafia's commission, a title that didn't exist, as on paper, all bosses in the commission were equal. However, we cannot say that Gambino never saw the inside of a jail cell, as he was convicted of running an illegal liquor still in 1937, and served almost 2 years for it, but that would be the last time he would ever serve time behind bars. He would die of natural causes in 1976 at the age of 74, at the height of his power. As you can see, these mobsters were the best of the best as crime bosses, avoiding significant jail time and dying of natural causes. So, did you know any of these names, or did they surprise you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. If you have enjoyed this video, you will probably enjoy this one too. Be sure to leave a like on the video and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our weekly top 10 videos. Thank you for watching. This is Who's Number 1. See you next time.